Hey everyone. All right, so I'm at a standstill right now. I'm setting up my new garage. I just moved, having some significant power issues. My CNC doesn't work. Some of my other tools are having some problems, all dealing with power. I have an electrician coming out next week. Hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on some wood, all those get resolved and I continue on. But I had a guy reach out to me. He wanted to see how I made a complete step-by-step on how I do all my splines for my boxes. And splines, there's usually two purposes between splines and inlays that you can put in. One is it gives additional strength in these miters, these 45-degree cut miters. And without these splines, these keys, this joint is extremely weak. And what it does is it just produces an additional plane worth of glue. And it really just strengthens everything up. Second purpose is it looks awesome. It's a pretty good design feature. If you don't have these in, it just kind of looks like the box or whatever you're making is just almost incomplete. So there's ways of doing this. I'm going to show you my way. It's pretty quick. I made it as simple as possible, and I was able to actually get pretty good results. I have different examples here. These two are big leaf maple burl. This is quilted maple and then some other materials, but the big thing is just contrasting wood species. So this is quilted maple, this is an affinity grain, so it's matching grain all the way around the box, and then a waterfall from top to bottom. I have a video on this on my channel. If you have time, check that out. But again, I used a darker color from the lighter color base just to make sure that it's contrasting. I also do these on box joints. Now, when you do them on box joints, these that doesn't give them any additional strength, but what it does do is it cleans up these cuts, and then what it also does is it produces just a cleaner look, and I really like it, and that ladder effect is super awesome. So when we do the step-by-step, I'm going to show you how to do this ladder just without the box joint. And again, pretty simple stuff. But once you master this and you start doing additional inlays, I mean, it's just endless possibilities, endless amount of designs, and you can get some pretty good results. So with that, we'll get started. All right, so I'm going to take you guys with me. Again, I'm just setting up my shop. My CNC, not happy about that. Still doing a lot of put away, putting everything together. I have a terrible issue with offcuts and my inability to throw wood away. And for this little tutorial that we're going to do, let me see. Yeah, this is quilted maple. This is big leaf down here, but I have just way too much scrap, offcut. I can't throw anything away, and a whole bunch of crap wood, and yeah. So let's get started, and we'll see what we can do with this thing. All right, so over here at the bandsaw, I'm just going to go ahead and measure how thick this is, and right now it's just under 1.5. That will get us right where we kind of need to be. It's pretty close. I'm going to do this live, so usually I do all my editing and I'll do voiceovers, but I got a new wireless mic, so we're going to do everything kind of live right now. So these are pretty close, and if we want to book match these, this is going to be the conjoining side, so nothing can move from this. So we'll put this in the drum sander, we'll even this out, and then we'll take some material off this back just to get our final distance here. Okay. All right, I got my cleaned up two faces, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to join these up long ways like this, and then a really long, a bunch of keys, and I'll show you how fast this process actually is, with a whole bunch of keys. And then we'll do another inlay all the way down to connect, and we'll just make a huge ladder. Mark everything that I'm going to join, these edges. That way when I do my miter cuts, I'll know what side I'm going to cut. All right, let's get these cut. All right, so the miters are cut. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sand these to the final finishing sanding on the inside of the box. So if you could imagine, this is a pretty tall box, 4 corners. It's really hard to sand in between here. So before we go any further, go ahead and just hit this all the way to 320. So I like to use tape, and then I'll clamp later on. Doing this will kind of keep everything together. All right. Now what we'll do is we're going to load this up. Make sure this is nice and flush. All right, so you can just see how much glue came out of that. All right, so we'll let that dry, and let's go cut a bunch of splines. I made this. I have a YouTube video on this one specifically. It used to be a picture frame jig also, and when I was building my dad's box, I'll post the link to that in the description. I ended up having to tear this out because this was up higher and I couldn't do the full box. So I ended up pulling all this out. And just a note, so this is plywood. I pocketed it, right? So I cleared all this stuff out, and then I glued walnut with a ruler on top. And boy, did I have a heck of a time trying to pull this stuff out. I was really surprised just how strong that glue was. So very interesting. But right now we're just going to do a test cut. And I ended up having a little bit of scrap through my huge scrap pile. And I'll just do a quick test on this edge because this is kind of a knot area. And I'll use this to test the fit of all my splines. And that will be the gauge on how thick my splines will be. All right, so the trick, we'll use a little bit of tape, and we're just going to put a little tape along the edge of this. That way when you cut your splines, when they fall off, they won't fall inside your table saw. So this is there. All right. We're going to eyeball this to where we want it. And that should be a good start. That's a pretty good fit. And so now the fence doesn't move. This stop block is set. And so now it's just rinse and repeat. So here's a bunch of splines. I usually cut a ton of these and I'll use them, but just know that there's a good edge and then there's not that great of an edge. So I'm going to cut 2 inlays out of this material, the same thickness as this spline. And we can use the key that we just used to get the distance that we're going to need. It's going to be pretty close. Let's do, well, looks actually pretty good. All right, so we got 5, or excuse me, 4, and we're going to turn these into 8. I was looking at this joint just a little bit further, and what I don't want to do is put the splines in and then the dust from these splines getting into here and then changing the color to that walnut and filling that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the fill in first and then I'll cut the splines. So to do that, sanding sealer. This stuff is going to fix this issue, and usually, you know, at the end of the day, I usually take my time and I really pay attention to the seams, and the keys and the inlays are really super tight. Here I was working a little bit too fast, and so little issues like this happen when you don't take your time. So what we're going to do is I'll show you the trick. We're just going to dab sanding sealer in, and then with my dust collection system off, I'm going to go ahead and sand. And what it's going to do is all that excess material that we're sanding off will get pushed into that seam. Now this will take a couple coats to do this, but you can already start seeing that it will start filling all that good sawdust, and I'll just fill that right in. All right, so that big gap is pretty much gone. Now, there's still a little bit of work on that edge to get all those little black lines out of it, but we should be okay. So, all right, now we'll measure and we'll cut each one of these splines. We're just going to mark every inch. Now these are a lot of splines. You don't typically would need all this to reinforce a joint. Okay, this is probably one of the most critical things that we have to figure out here is the distance that these keys will be, how far on each side. So we'll do a test cut here, and just to see where it lands. So it's critical that we know the distance that the height of this blade will be to this. So what I want is the thickness of this board. Okay, the thickness here. And again, this was like 0.7-ish. It was pretty close. 0.67. This cannot exceed in between the two splines that I wanted to cut. So to give a demonstration of this, and this is only when you put inlays that are going to connect this ladder pattern. So because I want these lines to match all the way down, and I want to connect these splines together, this spline cannot go past this portion. So if I cut it too deep, which this would be too deep, I don't know if you guys can see that, right? So that spline would technically go past this line, and it would screw everything up. I'm pretty spot on just where this is at. If it wasn't, I could go up or down depending on if I needed to increase or decrease the amount of material that this is removing. But it looks like it's pretty spot on. So I'm comfortable with that, where it's at right now, just for this demonstration. So let's go ahead and we'll lock that in, and we'll start cutting. So it's pretty fast. I got kind of loosey on that one. The other ones are pretty centered, and they all look good. So now, next thing we do is let's put our splines in. All right, so really there's really only one way of doing this, and that is making as big a mess as humanly possible. You're going to use a lot of glue, and you're just going to put them right in. All right, so got all the keys installed. Everything is super tight, looks really good. This is an extremely strong joint. All these additional planes of glue and material really did strengthen this entire joint. Basically, I could stand on this thing, it's not going to come apart. But we're going to let this dry. Once it's dry, we'll cut these off. We'll install these inlays, and we'll connect this ladder pattern, which will be super cool. Then I'm going to put some ferric nitrate on this, and that's going to do something really cool. It's going to enhance this figure of this quilted maple, and then it's also going to ebonize these walnut keys. So these walnut keys are going to basically turn black, and it'll be a super good contrast. It'll be a good experiment, and we'll see if it turns out. All right, we'll let this dry. The splines are all glued. It's pretty much set, so we're going to cut these off. Now you can use a hacksaw, you can use a whole variety of different methods. I like to use the bandsaw. I'll hit it all in one shot, and makes it very quick, very easy. The thing is, make sure you don't cut into your box. That's probably the most important thing. All right, let's sand this down. All right, so I set my depth of cut based on my inlay, based on the inlay that I had. So I wanted to make sure I took enough material out, but I didn't want to go over the size of the height of this. So I just did a quick test cut, and I mean, they fit just awesome. But I wanted to make sure my distance was correct, so I measured what I needed to take off of this, and it was spot on to where I wanted. So we're going to go ahead and cut these, and I'm going to go ahead and just cut this side, and then we're going to cut this side, and then we'll connect everything. All right, so I'm going to show you guys this. I did this on purpose. Sometimes, and this has happened to me in the past, right? Sometimes you don't take all the material out that was in there. So you can see I missed each one of these. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to tap my fence over just a little bit, and I'm going to take the rest of those lines out. So we'll go right back over the table saw, and I can see exactly where my other cut was. So now I know I have to cut just a little bit more on this side. So I'm going to move my fence just a smidge over. All right, now we are good to go. We have taken all that walnut out, and we're going to put an inlay right in this seam, and we'll connect everything together. Now, again, it is strictly dependent on this next inlay. You have to really pay attention. So this top part has to be the same size. Once you have your fence aligned, you cannot move it. You can correct it because you can line up your blade along this edge, but again, you have to be really, really accurate, and you have to really take your time. But you can still line that inlay on the top portion if you really want to. But let's recut these two splines. All right, so off camera, I went ahead and cut these inlays, and it took just a couple minutes. It didn't take long. Right, so just a little bit thicker than the original ones because we accounted for that extra width of that cut, and now it's just time to glue. Now, I didn't need to do that for the splines, but when you cut these inlays in half, what you'll see is this is really rough from the bandsaw. This is very smooth because, you know, we cut everything on the table saw and everything was really square and all that stuff. So I had a really clean edge on this. This clean edge needs to be on the bottom. So when you install the inlay, it goes all the way to the bottom and it's flush all the way down. The rough end, we're going to sand off and it won't matter. There is no easy method to this. It is messy, and that's okay, because I probably use way too much. All right, we'll let that dry. Alright, so we got everything sanded up pretty nicely, all the way down to 320. I mixed some ferric nitrate. Comes in this bottle, and it's basically just crystals you mix with distilled water. Different ratios will give you different results and how it reacts. So this stuff is pretty easy to work with. You're basically just getting it wet, and you're just going to rub it in. So this is all water-based, and you can be pretty liberal with how it reacts, how it is, you know, how it's applied. So it's going to get kind of weird because this first stage, it'll turn the maple into this pukish, grayish, greenish color. And it's pretty off-putting, but the second phase is when you apply heat, and that heat induces that chemical reaction, and it dumps a whole bunch of iron into the material. Alright, I'm going to let that dry, and we'll come back to this. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes, and this thing is dry. Now you can see that it turned it like a greenish color, but now what we're going to do is we're going to hit this with a little bit of heat. Now it takes quite a lot of heat to start this reaction, so you got to be really careful so you don't burn the corners or anything like that. But once it starts, it turns into something really, really cool. Another important tip is you don't want to heat up that glue to where it loses the pureness of that. Alright. After I put the iron nitrate on, and then I heated it to dump all that iron into the grain of the quilted maple. I noticed it was going to be super dark, and if I put finish on it, it was going to be really dark. And you know, with the contrast between these splines and the inlays, it probably wouldn't have looked very good. So playing around, you know, if you put this stuff on, you can sand all the way down and you can bring it back to the original condition of the wood. It doesn't penetrate that far. But what I did do is I sanded to 320, and I wanted to bring those highlights all the way back out and then just leave some really dark spots into the grain. And I tried to take a good majority of it off on the actual miter so I could highlight this entire inlay and spline. Hopefully given the right contrast, but you can just see, even in just sanding it to 320, it really brought all that quilt out. And I'm gonna go mix some Rubio up, and we'll put some oil on it, and we'll see how it turned out, and then we'll see the comparison on the other side and see if you guys can see a difference. But I mean, just looking at it right now, it's gonna be really deep. And I'm really excited about this. All right, let's put some oil on it. All right, guys, so I mean, this kind of finished everything up. If you stuck in there, I know this was a pretty long video, and if you made it to the end, I definitely appreciate it. If you're new, definitely subscribe, like, leave a comment though. Let me know if you like this better, or do you like this better. Really interested to see what you guys think. Again, fun experiment. It's always good to do this stuff. I'm going to leave this hanging up in the garage so I can reference it, and you know, it's just a reminder of, you know, different applications, different little ways of doing things. I'll look at this over the next couple days and see if it turns. I'll take it outside, see the different contrasts and colors, and we'll see if this will make it into a future project at some point in its life. But again, I appreciate you guys hanging in there, and we'll see you in the next video. All right, thanks guys.